Yeah.
Just before going into night three, because I think that's really interesting, and I think it's something. It has a lot of personal resonation with me because I've always had this, ever since I was very, very young. Really had this strange sort of not obsession with death, but sort of when I first realized my own mortality, I was sitting in this almost a similar thing, but obviously without any drugs. I was sitting in this Lake Garda in Italy, right? And if you've ever been, it's beautiful. And I sat there with my mum and dad, and I was probably about 14 years old. And I looked at this, and I don't know what my brain went. I went, you know, one day, you're not going to be here, and you can't look at this again. And I just like immediately hit this fear, just hit me. I was like, oh my God, I've never even thought about this.
Yeah.
And I rushed to the loo. I was like, I need the loo, like try to hide it from my mum and dad, and just sat there shaking. And I didn't know what that was at the time. And then I've had bouts of this where I had moments where I couldn't stop thinking about death, like late at night. And like every night when I go and I start to let go of the day and all that sort of stuff, it comes into my brain. And I remember this was like about 8 months after my first long-term breakup. I went through a really bad bout of it. And I was starting to realize going, hold on. I'm not a person that thinks the signs and things happen for a reason. And but I do think that this it happened to me because it's like, Simon, you're wasting your life. Get up and move on from this. Otherwise you're just going to go through life. And then I started getting that a bit last year for the first time in a long time. And it was at a time when I was in that sort of, and as I was saying to you before coming on the show, before we click record, in that time of life when I was like, okay, I'm kind of past the one-to-one coaching. I want to move into something that excites me. I want to push this podcast. I want to push some education. I want to do these things that I see in the next decade of my life. And all of a sudden then, when I'm in this sort of rut in my life, these thoughts start coming up again. Mm-hmm. And it reminded me of, in a similar way, I've not done ayahuasca, but my first LSD trip, where I don't want to call it a bad trip. I call it a hard trip because I refuse to say it was bad. I think it was important. And I just, in that same thing, I couldn't let go. I had my mates going, Simon, relax. And I'm like, I am relaxed. And I felt it at the time, but I was just tensed up. And I was fighting to find normality. It was in the middle of lockdowns. I was looking at people on the beach doing bicep curls with bands and just trying to find things that found normality, and gym stuff was that for me. And I remember walking from the little thing where my mates were, and I was sat down on this sort of, we had this sort of like circular trellis, and there was like a walkway and another one. And I sat down, I was chatting to a couple of mates, and I was talking about like my fear of this, and almost just, in a way, letting it go a little bit. And it's never been quite as intense since. But I remember they went, I said, I want a moment of my own. And I sat there, and I'm looking at the twigs in the floor, and they look like they're moving. And I'm almost feeling like relaxed and panicked at the same time. My mates are just there, but I feel there's an imaginary force field that I can't like get to them. And I'm just having to deal with this emotion. And then my mate Louis, who was a technically exile shaman, he's a Filipino boy that dabbles in any plants that he can, just comes and just like he knew, and he just comes and sits and puts his arms on my shoulder and chills me out. And I think that's it resonated a lot with me, that thing. Like when you mentioned that, and like, how important do you feel that moment, like, of, even though you found maybe it was better to let go in that second time, are you glad you didn't because what it taught you?
Well, it all came full circle for me the third night. Because I was so tired that third night, and the song that they were playing was like, sometimes they play these songs that almost sound like little kids babbling at you or something like that. And it just was so annoying to me. Like if a little kid was like pestering you like na 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 na, but they did it for like an hour straight, like right next to your ear, and we're like fucking, doing that to you, where you're like, oh my God, stop. Fucking stop. Leave me alone. And I remember laying there, and I was just trying to like go to sleep, and it was like, make the fucking music stop. And at a certain point, I just, in my head, I go, I wish I was fucking dead. And then it was like, oh my God, I'm wishing for the thing that I was fighting so hard on the first night. It's the same concept the same experience. In one circumstance, I was avoiding it like it was the plague, and now I want it. I'm wishing for it on a level of depth that is unbelievable, you know? And it like went into this cascade, like where my brain was like, I have zero patience. I don't understand the concept of patience. And then like I visualized the notion of patience, and it just seems to be like this phenomenon that gets sent from another realm. That like some things have a limited capacity, like human physical strength has a limited capacity. Like even if you think Hafthor Bjornsson is unlimited, he's not. He can't pick up a skyscraper. You know what I mean? There's a limit to all things, like vertical jumping capability. Even if you think that some of the guys in the NBA have, that's impossible. Well, they're not jumping 40 feet high. There is a clear and obvious limit. But patience actually seems to have no limit when people cultivate it. And it was like, well, what is this? This is almost like from another dimension, a higher dimension, this quality that is almost bestowed down upon us that you can tap into. Like, are you patient or do you tap into patience? And I realized for myself, like, I am a very impatient person. And, it was kind of like this understanding of like, if you practice patience, the things that come at the end of patience are odd lessons that have a deeper reward significance than short-term gratification bullshit things that we all get nowadays. There's never a bad time for patience. Patience is never the wrong answer. Patience is a type of strength that I don't understand, but it is beyond any kind of strength that I have ever known in my life. So it was like, wow, that is amazing. And I like just this realization of how little of it I have, but it was also this realization of like, man, you're a father. You better learn this concept real fucking fast, buddy, because this little being is going to test this element of you more than anyone you've ever met. Okay? It's going to happen. And if you don't get better at this, you're setting this little being up for all of the same problems that you had as a result of not being able to trust someone, So it was like a very profound, deep impact. Like there were so many things that kind of emerged from that second one. A realization of like the current life structure I was living in. Like my father was never there in my life. He was never in an active relationship with my mother. I never knew him. And I was in a situation where, hey, I might become someone's father that I might not be able to be there for. Like if I'm in the current relationship circumstances that I'm in, I might become my father for somebody else. And like it was this realization, like, man, I don't really know who the hell my father was, what his deal was. My family hated my father, and all I ever heard was really negative things about him. If I keep doing what I'm doing, I'm going to create another family that hates me in some way, shape, or form, in some pocket. And some little being is going to come into this world, and they're only going to be told really bad things about this father that's not there. And it was like, oh my God, I'm becoming this man that I hate. And I can't fucking do that. Like, and it was this real, like, I never thought I would be that guy, like, my whole narrative based around this person was like, I'm definitely not anything like this guy. And then to all of a sudden be like, oh my God, I might become that fucking guy. Like somehow his story might become my story. How did that happen? And it was a weird level of empathy for this man that I've never known. But I realized like his genetic contribution lives inside of me. And it's not that hard to make yourself the villain of someone else's story. Like
it's interesting how many things can go into your subconscious as well, right? I wonder how all those people that did not like your father saying, well, as you were growing up, this man's horrible, I don't like this man's horrendous, plays on your psyche. So when you're growing up, you're there going, I don't have the belief in myself that I can be a good father because all I've heard about a father figure is how horrendous they are.
Yeah.
And even if you don't recognize at the time, it's like something like this makes you go, well, I've never known how to be a father. All I know is this second-hand opinion of somebody I've never met,
Yeah.
playing on my belief.
Like, I mean, absolutely. Those things go into it like on such a crazy level. Like, like that was like a wild thing. The other really like intense thing, it's like hard to necessarily give the specifics. It felt like the lesson that I got from it was that the human experience on a collective level, like societal or anything like that, we're all trying to like manage a million balls in the air at the same time. You know, like and sometimes some of them come down, but it's like everyone's responsibility to kind of collectively push this thing up. Like if you're ever a kid and they, you know, like with gym class, we had every now and then the parachute, you know what I mean? And we all have to like get under the parachute and lift it up. It felt
Remember
like
that?
it felt kind of like that. And like as a society, it's just this bigger parachute and it's constantly pushing. And like some people are lazy and they don't contribute to it at all. And it's like a sag over there. And if the whole thing sags, it all crashes and falls down. But it's like up to everyone to try to help keep this thing up, to keep it afloat. And it's a very tenuous circumstance. And, you know, and then it was kind of like, this realization that there's like certain people that take the spotlight during this effort. And like we all put our attention on them and it's their turn and their time to put in this heroic effort. And like, man, like we need you right now. And then sometimes those people don't want to give up the spotlight. They like it too much. But you need to pass it to others. It's just part of the experience of what we're doing as a species to keep ourselves going and moving and growing. And you know, so you have to accept the spotlight when you're uncomfortable, but it's your turn. And like, hey, it's my time, man. Like for whatever reason, the world and the environment and everyone else, it's pointing at me, and it's my time in the sun. It's my time to shine, and I have to give it my best shot, not just for me but for everyone, because it's time to put my best foot forward and inspire others for when it's their turn to put their best foot forward and be an example, a shining kind of example for others. But I have to give it up when I've done my song and dance and done my little part in it, and then I have to celebrate and support someone else when it's their turn and their experience in the spotlight. And both of those roles are hard to do. To be the person in the spotlight and to give your best effort, and then to support the other people when it's their turn. Yeah. So it was like a really interesting view into kind of like our species and a lot of the sub lessons of our cultural elements as well, if you kind of begin to really think about that and unpack that. So
is that the sort of the ego disillusion that people talk about? And like, if that's so, does that last? Or is that something you have this profound thing? Because I remember coming off my first LSD trip where I was like, I not an ego death, but just sort of like this appreciation for everything. Like you walk the street, I don't need my phone anymore. I don't mean that dopamine rush. I don't mind the car sounds. I see a butterfly and all this like wishy-washy Disney shit. But you go back into your old routine.
Yeah.
It doesn't last forever. Does it last with this? Because it's more of a dramatic experience that sort of goes into your psyche.
So it intensifies everything. It's just like, you know, it's like rocket fuel that brings you to the highest levels of these concepts. You know, maybe it'll make you as uncomfortable as you can possibly be during a certain time, or it will make you have these revelations to like this incredible mind expanding. Like, I'll just say it for me. I had some of the most intensely uncomfortable experiences, some of the most revelatory experiences. And like, I mean, you talk about like what I'm describing here, understanding what trust means, understanding what patience means, understanding what the collective roles and responsibility and sharing is what it comes down to. Sharing, the importance of fucking sharing. Trust, patience, and sharing are the three things that I learned through what I talked about there. And there's like other things that I still, haven't even gotten to, as far as like major visceral learning components. Like these are not, like you said, kind of like the Disney experience of little birds floating over to me and like, oh, wow. Like, no, like these are like the bedrocks of humanity. You need other humans, and because like what I got to, like I felt like I was out on like the plains of Africa at a certain point or something in the dark with like crazy animals surrounding us, and it's like I've got your back and you've got my back, and I need to trust you, and I need to sleep at some point, and I need you to be awake, and then we're gonna switch. Like, where does all this shit come from, man? It comes from me having to have faith in you, that you're going to do your part to keep us alive and safe. And then you're going to have faith in me to keep us alive and safe. And I'm going to have fucking courage and fortitude and show off all of my physical and mental and psychological and emotional expressions of what makes me a being. Because at some point, those hyenas are going to come in. At some point, those lions are going to try to come in. And we have to stand tall together during these moments. And like that's a part of our collective species memory that's being shared with me, what that must have felt like to like kneel on a rock in the dark with those crazy noises of nighttime felines and other animals that are ferocious and terrifying. And it's just us right now standing tall together like silhouettes in the dark. And like we have to have a drum beat, because that shit's coming, and it might be another tribe that's coming, and there's going to be threats, and there's going to be these other things. And if we can't find that collective beat that brings us together and gives us the strength and courage to face the almost unfaceable, we're fucking wiped out. We're dead. But you know what? Our ancestors at some point faced that shit, and we're here. That's the only way you know that they faced it. They passed it along, and others and others and others and others, and all those people that came before you. All of that strength, it's still in you. Their collective spirit is in you. And it's just amazing. Like that's amazing. That kind of historical sweep of what that must have felt like. And they had to have these things. They had to trust. They had to have patience. They had to have courage. They had to have each other. And you have to sacrifice your ego for that. Like, it's not just like this wishy-washy, as you kind of called it, like, oh, I need to let my ego go so I can post about it on Instagram. No, motherfucker. Like, you need to let your ego go because you're the one whose turn is to eat shit right now and be awake so that, like 3 lions don't come into our space and ultimately murder all of us. Like,
yeah, absolutely. So, like, obviously, that was your first 2, and I know that we haven't got a crazy amount of time to go into the story, but like, with regards to what's the biggest other than the ones you've mentioned? What's the biggest lessons the biggest lesson you got from one of the other ceremonies?
So the other, the one that I really like to relay was. It's funny because it was the third one. And the third one had some weird parts to it. Like, I spent a lot of time thinking about Michael Jordan in the third one. It was this weird realization of, like, Michael Jordan is the greatest person to ever play basketball. And his ability in basketball is so unbelievable that it's hard to actually, like, really speak to fairly. And we can all kind of agree, like, Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player ever. And he's so good at basketball that when we think of other people being good at something, we oftentimes say, like, oh, he's the Michael Jordan of, playing the piano. Or he's the Michael Jordan of this, that, or the other thing. So it's like, wow, if you're so good at one thing that other people that are good at their thing are basically said to be the you of that thing, like, that's unbelievable. Like, and it started from there as like greatness. What is human greatness all about? And like, this is because I was thinking Michael Jordan is probably better at basketball than anyone is at anything that I know in the world. Like, he's better at this thing than anyone else is as good as they are at their thing of anyone that I've had experience with in the world. Like, wow, that's how fucking good this guy was at this thing. So it started kind of from that. And then it was like, it was sort of reflective of me and like, what am I good at? You know, what am I really good at? And it was like, well, I'm pretty good at like thinking of central concepts that I can build models around. Like, intellectually being able to build thought models is what I'm actually good at. And it was kind of like, oh, I actually did have this idea that turned into this seminar system and book that I created. Like, that's pretty good, you know, and because it started as like one idea, and then it kind of grew from there, and it was one idea that's still alive at this point 4 years later. And because I put effort into this thing, the idea grew and became wider and like a different shape than it originally was. But it all goes back to this one central idea that was clear, coherent, had some rules to it, and made enough sense to where it actually had the capacity to become something bigger, but only because I put effort into it. And it was like, I'm pretty proud of myself. Like, I have an idea that turned into a 4-year idea. That's pretty good. And then it was like, oh, actually, like, other people have had much better ideas than my idea. Like, my idea is like this big, and like the first thing that popped into my head, oddly enough, was smartphones, and just thinking like someone had the idea for this thing, and look at how much that's turned into. And then I was like, yeah, smartphones kind of suck in comparison to like people actually built the pyramids. Like, that's a fucking weird idea. First of all, like, just as a, burial chamber basically. But like the collective, because then it turned into like, man, as a singular person can like have an idea and it can grow pretty impressively. But when you get other people on board with an idea and they put their collective effort in, like, oh, it's amazing how big, because it was visually like a tunnel that was the size of the idea for me that I was seeing. And like, I compared my little tunnel to like an iPhone tunnel, to like the pyramids, the Sistine Chapel, incredible artwork, the statue of David, like this idea, and then like the scope and power of the rules, clarity, and the demonstration of the idea. But then it zoomed out, because I was like, I ultimately realized these are all human ideas. And then it was kind of like, are there ideas that are non-human that also exist? And like, it just dawned on me, oh my God, all of the life on Earth is an idea. It's an idea. Okay? Like, and it's an idea that's so old, at least on this planet, that like the idea is that I have nucleic acids that can replicate and mutate with a language of like ATG, UGC. Like, it's just a little alphabet that is the rule book for how the assemblage of structures originating from nucleic acid communication works. I was like, oh my God, it's just a little language. It's a tiny language that tells tiny little things, the blueprint for how to build things. And it starts as one central pinpoint idea on this planet's history, and boom, the idea just grew into all of the life that exists on this whole planet. That's an idea, because the scope of the length of time of that idea on this planet was just like, boom, like my little pinhole idea size, other human larger pinhole idea sizes. And then the idea of evolution was just like, boom. And then the, like, zooming past that idea as like, what's the idea? Because like life as we know it, like the nucleic acids that started that process on this planet, they arrived on meteorites that came from elsewhere. Like that didn't originate on this planet. Like the idea is larger than a planetary idea. The idea is from somewhere else. And then it was kind of like, well, what's the idea that brought the whole thing into motion? And I visualized the origins of kind of our universe. And the origins of the universe that I visualized was two gigantic competing forces that bumped into each other and that had a collective idea, but it couldn't work because they were so oppositional. And but they realized at one point in time that if they had an agreement that where they each blocked the other in some way, shape, or form, they basically came together in a handshake. But it was two hands like a human hands, so that they can't shake each other's hands properly. It doesn't match like me using my right hand to shake your right hand. It was the same thing trying to have a handshake with itself with oppositional, matching hands, but they're the left and the right trying to shake each other. So they never fit together all that well. So they keep, but the origin of the idea, the clap, boom, was the Big Bang. And that Big Bang was a phase of like it was the exhale component of this coming together. And it was an agreement. We're going to give a little bit to make this happen. Each of us, we're going to try to find this agreement. And by trying to find this agreement, like the emergence of this thing occurs, but it's never finalized, it's never finished, it never fits all that well, it never feels quite right, which creates just enough turbulence and tension and difficulty for movement to happen. And how do you find, your place in this agreement? Because like I was kind of like, what are the two hands? What are the forces that came together? And for me, the closest explanation I could come up with was that one hand is limitless potential, and the other hand is constraints. And that when you impose limitless potential with constraints, formation of shape can take place. Either one nullifies the other one if it runs amok at full blast. But when they are attempting to come together, they allow expression to take place. And the better the expression is, the more that they calibrate and adjust at any point in time on the fly. So and on a micro level, I realized I have problems in my life all the time of various sorts, and that the only solution to any of my problems is the opposite of whatever it is that I'm too ingrained in. So if I'm feeling too stuck, I have too much in the way of constraints imposed upon myself in this part of my life. The solution to it is to expand and to look at things from a more limitless perspective. What are more options here? I'm fucking stuck. I need to think about it from the perspective of the options are limitless. I just need to think about it that way, versus I am so chaotic and I'm not going anywhere and I can't rein this in. My solution is more constraints at this point in time. I need to decrease my options, and if I do that, now I can focus on something and begin to take shape. So that was probably like the most, of all of these things, that was the one where I was like, oh my God, like what kind of concepts were these that came into my head? And they didn't feel like my own concepts. That felt more like something else, the plants communicating with me to show me a history lesson of like, because every time you do one of these in the beginning, the shaman asks you what your intention is. And on that evening, my intention that I stated was, I would like to see how things came to be. And that's ultimately kind of like what was unfolded from my experience. So it was like, it's most of the time, it's a very simple rule that actually begins things. You know, hey, neither of us, we can't do this on our own. Like I can't, even though the power of the concept of constraints is beyond imagination, and the power of limitless potential is beyond imagination. And really, one is just a compressive force, and the other one's a purely expansive force. Like, in and of myself, I can't do anything. But together, woof, everything can emerge. But we have to balance each other. Like that's the only way that this can work. But that balance is never going to be perfect. It's always going to be like off center, and that like it's just this. The word that comes to mind for me is calibration. And the only way that you can accurately calibrate is to be very present and very aware of the exact circumstances that you're in. So the presence that you have to be in and the degree to which you accurately appraise it is the critical part. And the only way that you can calibrate, the closest thing that we have to it is something that people can understand, is the hot and cold game. You know, are you hotter or are you colder? And you're kind of bumping around like with your eyes closed, and like no one's there to actually announce hot or cold. You have to listen to the environment around you to determine, am I getting hotter or am I getting colder? And you generally know that, you know, but do you have the courage to be able to continue to move towards hot? And that is the channel way, the pathway towards interacting with the greatest reality that exists for us, and your greatest ability to ultimately come up with your most clear ideas that, if you choose to push forward into them, could ultimately, I'm going to use an Instagram word here, manifest into building new things, your own personal pyramids, your own personal amazing ideas. But at any point in time, you could go off the rails and either become too constrained or too limitless. And your only solution is to return to being present and read the situation correctly and find that kind of oblique channel that's hard to move through, that is your guideway towards continuing to make this idea work. Because I could understand it with evolution, like, hey man, you can't keep going down the same trajectory here. The environment just changed because a meteor hit the earth. You got to pivot. You know, you got to play the hot and cold game again. It's just that what's hot is like, hey, it's over. It's behind me now. I got to like reorient and calibrate and be able to find that thing. So, yeah.
I think that is a great story to end on. I think we've had 3 incredible stories from 3 different ceremonies that have given you different things. And I think that one, in a sense, like whether you go and do an ayahuasca trip, you've been on an ayahuasca trip, or you just have no interest, that lesson is very, very interesting of what you've just gone through. And it's interesting that you said about the limitless and the constraints. And it really is true for everything in life. Like most of the time when you feel sort of like stuck with no options, it's not a grand thing that happens. It's someone just showing you a little bit more potential, a little bit more limitless, and you go, oh my God, it was just staring me in the face, but I couldn't see it. And it's interesting you mentioned hot and cold game, but also I found really interesting you used the word compression and expansion, and shows how many of these things, you know, it's just essentially the law of the universe. Expression and is what you talk about every day based around the rib cage. Everything from your rib cage to the choices in your life to the universe is limits versus constraints.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an incredible moment to end on. So for people who, if this is the first one they've listened to with you, madness, don't understand why. But for people who want to go back and listen to more of these, and they should, where can people find you and learn? Because you are an open filter on these shows, why I love every time you come on this show, because generally you're one of the most open, honest persons who are just willing to talk. And it's the same thing even on Instagram, which is rare in today's world. So I definitely recommend people go and follow you. So where can people find?
Yeah, I
Go
think
for
the
it.
easiest place is my Instagram, which is at Dr. Pat Davidson, Dr. period Pat Davidson. Everything that I have, products and whatever, it's all in that Instagram bio link. You can see, the training options, the education options. That stuff's all in there. So
And don't message Pat asking for an easier link, right? It's 2 clicks.
yeah,
Don't ask him for one.
yeah. Like when people are like, "Hey, where can I find Athletic Weapon?" I'm like, "You're messaging me through the Instagram DMs."
Mm. Cool. Hold on. Yeah, I got you. I think I got you back.
Um,
Yeah, got you. Cool. I can edit that bit out anyway. I'll have your recording until then. Can you hear me? Nothing. I got you back.
I don't know what happened to the
Hold on.
volume on my end.
Well, I got you there. Yeah, can you hear me? You got me? Nothing. I got you back. I lost you for a while. Not sure. Hold on.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I still don't have any audio on mine, but if that's good, like it's probably a good place to end. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's the universe spoke to us and said that's where it ends.
Hold on.
All right, man. Hey, I will. Um, I'm not sure where it says that. It doesn't give me any like. It just I think it started over again. Like right now, it's at 125. So did that would have worked then?
Yeah. Okay, you're in. I think you're in. Cool. We're good.
Good. Okay. Cool. All right, man. Hey, I will talk to you soon. This was a pleasure as always.
As always, man. Cool.